Touchdown pass.
Peyton bounces around, throws. The ball will be caught. Julius Thomas, touchdown, Denver.
What is up, guys? And thanks for joining me again for another segment of Beyond the Sport. If you saw my most recent video, then you know that I am doing a lot of NFL draft content. In that video, I did my 5 biggest winners of the 2020 NFL draft. And of course, I'm sure you can gather based on what I'm saying and figure out that this is going to be my 5 biggest losers of this NFL draft. There were a lot of teams that made some questionable picks. They took guys a little bit too early. They reached. They didn't fill the needs that they should have. And they just didn't quite utilize the picks that they had in place, whether or not that was the fact that they didn't have draft capital or they didn't do their best to try and gain some to try and load up the roster a little bit and fill in some gaps. But some teams did better than others. And in this video, I'm going to jump right into it, and I'm going to break down why I chose these 5 teams as the worst. One more disclaimer before I get this video going is, although this is a top 5 for both the biggest winners and the biggest losers, these are not supposed to be looked at as lists and as far as they go rankings, because this isn't a 1 through 5 where number 1 was the best in the winners category and number 1 was the worst in the losers category. It's simply just a top 5. It's accumulation of teams that I believe belong in category A as the winners and category B as the losers. It's as simple as that. Number 1 on the list, the Green Bay Packers. Starting off in round number 1 with pick number 26, the Packers decided to go with quarterback Jordan Love out of Utah State. This was a pick that made absolutely no sense to me. One, because of his value. I thought he was going to go somewhere in the second round. But not only that, but the fact that this was a team that has Aaron Rodgers and they refused to take one of the top talent receivers in this draft and put some weapons around him so they can give themselves a more legitimate shot to go further into the playoffs next season. In round number 2, I picked number 62. They decided to go with running back A.J. Dillon out of Boston College. He had a very successful career at Boston College, but this pick just didn't make sense when you have guys like Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. They have a loaded backfield, so why would you waste a second-round pick to improve something that doesn't need to be improved? Then in round number 3, at pick 94, tight end Josiah Deguara out of Cincinnati. He was a talented player at Cincinnati, but I just don't see the value in taking him at pick number 94 based on their current needs. Could they, of course, upgrade at the position? Sure, but I think that they should have went a different route. Then at pick number 175 in round 5, they went with linebacker Kamal Martin out of Minnesota. This was a pick where I do think that that's a position in need. I just don't think that that's the right player for them to be taking at 175. Then in round number 6, at pick 192, they took offensive lineman Jon Runyan out of Michigan. This was a pick where I do think it's good that they improved their offensive line. Michigan was the only school with 4 offensive linemen taken in this year's draft. They had a very good O-line. That's a solid player to be taking to improve that O-line further, to try and do your best to protect not only Aaron Rodgers now, but even Jordan Love potentially down the road. Then in that same round at pick 208, they took center Jake Hansen out of Oregon, another school with a good O-line. I get the logic here for trying to improve that O-line. I just don't think that that was the right pick for them there. Then in round number 6, I picked 209. They continued that trend with offensive tackle Simon Stepaniak out of Indiana. And this was one of those picks where I just figured there's bigger needs. They continued to not address the wide receiver position. Something with a draft class like this would have made a lot of sense. In round number 7, at pick 236, they took safety Vernon Scott out of TCU. A solid member. They could improve that secondary of theirs. The secondary that's very young. So I could understand that move as far as something that they're looking to do with that pick. And to cap it off with round number 7, pick 242, they went with edge rusher Jonathan Garvin out of Miami. They do have some good edge rushers, and I think that the D-line is something that is one of the strengths of the team. Definitely was one of the best aspects of that defense last year, and I don't know if that's a pick that they had to make. The value was there, so there is that, but overall, a lot of questionable decisions. Number 2 on the list, the Chicago Bears. Starting off with round number 2, as they're one of the teams that did not have a first rounder. At pick number 43, they went with Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame, the tight end. Very talented prospect at that position. I just figured it was very strange for them to go with a position that was not of their needs. There was a lot of other things that they could have addressed, but they chose to go with tight end. I believe that was now their 10th tight end on their roster after making that draft pick. That was a head scratcher to me. Then in round number 2, at the 50th overall spot, they took Jalen Johnson, cornerback out of Utah. I actually love this pick. Great value there. The biggest thing with him dropping 250 was the injury concerns as he was just beginning to get healthy. I do think that this actually was a very good pick, and that's a position of need for them to improve the secondary. Then in round number 5, at pick number 155, they took Travis Gibson, defensive end out of Tulsa. This was a pick where they already have such good edge rushers. I mean, when you have a guy like Khalil Mack, sure, you could put a guy on the other side of him or just provide depth for pass rushers as far as that goes. That's understandable. But it just didn't seem like a position that they desperately had to address. They are replacing Leonard Floyd, so I can understand it from that perspective. So that's not too bad of a pick, but overall I feel like they could have used it better. Then round number 5, pick number 163, Kendall Vilder, cornerback out of Georgia Southern. I feel like they had already capitalized with Jalen Johnson, so I don't think that the secondary was too big of a need after that to have to go and get a guy like that. Obviously there's sort of injury concerns that go with Johnson. But this was a pick where, again, I felt like there could have been a bigger need addressed. Then at round number 5, pick number 173, Darnell Mooney, wide receiver out of Tulane. This was a guy that showed great speed, and I think that this was the draft to take a wide receiver, no matter how big of a need it is. And I think that the receiving core for the Bears could definitely have been able to improve. There's a lot of room to improve, and I think that this was a good way of doing it, bringing in a speedster for Trubisky or Foles. A lot of uncertainty in that quarterback room. Then in round number 7, pick number 226, Arlington Hambright, offensive lineman out of Colorado. It never hurts to find a way to improve that offensive line depth. Games are won and lost in the trenches, and they were able to find some late round steals in their offensive line in the past, so I think that this is a pick that you can't have too much of a problem with. Round number 7, and the final pick of the draft for them, at 227, they took Lachavius Simmons, offensive tackle out of Tennessee State. Again, you're improving your offensive line, and you're trying to protect whichever quarterback it is that you are going to have out there on the field, so not too much of an issue with this. Overall, I didn't think they did particularly bad. They just didn't have too much draft stock going into it. And I just figured there were some picks here and there that they definitely could have gone a different route to address positions of need. Overall, it wasn't too bad, and I don't think there was many teams overall in this draft that particularly struggled, but they were one of the teams that came to mind because of that. Number 3 on the list, the Los Angeles Rams. Starting off in round number 2, just like the Bears, not much draft stock. They were one of those teams that did not have a first rounder, so at pick 52, they went with running back Cam Akers out of Florida State. This was a pick that just didn't make sense to me based on the value of taking a running back for your first pick of the draft. There's a ton of great positions of value that you could have addressed, yet you chose to go with the running back. And obviously Gurley was cut and signed with the Falcons, so they're trying to replace that void by taking him. They already know they have a solid receiving core. I just feel like that's a pick that was kind of wasted. Then in round number 2, pick 57, they then went with wide receiver Van Jefferson out of Florida. I like this pick because although their solid receiving core is currently in place over there in LA, it doesn't hurt to utilize the talent that this draft class has. I think that they should have went a different route as far as the receiver that they're going to take based on the value that Jefferson possesses, but that's a solid pick based on what they needed to go out and get. And then in round number 3, pick number 84, linebacker Terrell Lewis out of Alabama. Alabama is historically known for producing very talented linebackers. I like this pick. I think that they needed to replace Corey Littleton. That was a huge loss. That was a huge position of need after losing him, and I think that that was a very good pick for that reason. Then in round number 3 at pick 104, they went safety Terrell Burgess out of Utah, another talented member alongside Jalen Johnson in that Utah secondary that was part of a very good Utah team, and I think that that's a good position of need for them in that secondary. Getting a guy like Burgess was very wise of them. And round number 4, tight end Bryson Hopkins out of Purdue. This was a pick that I didn't quite understand. They have Higbee. They didn't need to address the tight end position. It just felt like a wasted pick to me. Then in round number 6, at pick 199, they went safety Jordan Fuller out of Ohio State. Jordan Fuller is a solid safety based on the value that they're getting for him. I just didn't think they needed to address it after drafting Burgess. I figured they could have gone a different route. Then in round number 7, at pick 234, they went linebacker Clay Johnston out of Baylor. I think that it was wise to improve that linebacking core. The only thing that continues to come up is why are they not improving other aspects of their team, such as their offensive line. I think that that's one of those things that was a big need for them and was a big struggle last year. Then in round number 7, at pick 248, they take kicker Sam Sloman out of Miami, Ohio. This is a pick where they're trying to replace Greg Zerland, who departed in the offseason. So that pick makes sense to me. Get yourself a kicker that you're confident in, because kickers, they are valuable players to the team. Obviously, they're only out there to kick their extra points and their field goals. But when you need a guy to kick one when the game's on the line, you want to make sure you have a good one. So I'm not too upset with a pick like that. And in round number 7, pick 250, they went with guard Tremaine Ankrum out of Clemson. And I like this pick to improve that interior offensive line. Aspect of the team that I thought they should have improved at higher rounds with more value. That is something that they waited to do till round 7. That I don't quite understand. And that mixed with the fact that they didn't have great value picks, especially not having a first rounder. That's why they get put into this list. Number 4 on the list, the Philadelphia Eagles. And they get things going in round number 1 with pick number 21 with Jalen Reagor, wide receiver out of TCU. This pick did not make sense to me. I believe that Reagor's a talented player. He's got a lot of speed, but he is a wide receiver in a very deep class that I think should have gone more realistically into the second round. I thought Justin Jefferson was a lock for them at 21. There was no situation in which I saw it going any other way, and they shocked me with this pick, because although they addressed the biggest position in need, they did not go with the right guy. Then in round number 2, at pick number 53, they take Jalen Hurts, quarterback out of Oklahoma. I actually think that Jalen Hurts is a solid player. I just don't understand why they would take him. Again, that's one of those things where a team went a route where they didn't take a position in need, and they wasted an early pick on a guy that they could utilize in different situations on offense. But overall, you have Carson Wentz. It doesn't make too much sense. Then in round 3, at pick number 103, you took Davion Taylor, a linebacker out of Colorado. Improving the linebacking core is not a bad way to go about it, especially when you're getting a guy like Taylor. So that's a pick that I don't mind too much. Then in round number 4, at pick number 127, Kevon Wallace, safety out of Clemson, trying to replace Malcolm Jenkins, who was a huge piece for that secondary and that defense as a whole. I don't mind that pick whatsoever. Then at round number 4, pick number 145, they get Jack Driscoll, offensive tackle out of Auburn. I actually think that that was a pretty solid pick, and I think that that's a position that they could definitely afford to try and bring in some young talent at. Then in round number 5, pick number 168, John Hightower, wide receiver out of Boise State. This was a wide receiver core that vastly needed to improve. They had to get some weapons for Carson Wentz. I believe he's a very talented quarterback. He just doesn't have enough help, and that's a good way to go about doing it. Then in round number 6, at pick number 196, they took Sean Bradley, linebacker out of Temple, continued to address that linebacking core need and get a solid linebacker at 196. Then later on that same round, in pick number 200, they took Quez Watkins, another wide receiver out of Southern Miss. Very good wide receiver to be taking, because this was a draft class where you have to utilize the talent in front of you. I think they did a very good job of that by taking their third wide receiver off the board. Then in round number 6, at pick 210, they take Prince Tega Wanogho, offensive tackle out of Auburn. He's a little bit of a project, but I do think that he was worth that pick at round 6 and pick number 210. This is a guy that dropped very far. I had him near the back end of my top 10 list as far as offensive tackles go. There was a lot of guys that went before him, and I actually like that pick for them. Then in round number 7, at pick 233, they went with Casey Toohill, outside linebacker out of Stanford, and that wrapped it off for them. I do think that overall their draft wasn't too bad, but I had to put them in this list because of the two most important picks, and that's in round 1 and round 2. Those were head scratchers to me, and that is why they fell on this list for sure. Number 5 on this list, the Las Vegas Raiders. Starting off in round number 1, pick number 12, the first wide receiver off the board is wide receiver Henry Ruggs out of Alabama. I'm actually going to start off by saying I actually love this pick. So among the teams that I did choose for this list, they're one of the few teams where they actually had a great first pick, in my opinion. I do think that Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb could have easily been better options, but I'm very high on Ruggs. I learned a lot about him later on in the months leading up to the draft. He's a speedster. They like their speed on that offensive side. I think Derek Carr got himself a very good weapon, and that was a huge position need for them. Then in round number 1, yet again at pick number 19, they went with cornerback Damon Arnette, Ohio State. This was a pick of great need. They had to then improve that secondary, but the only problem with that is the fact that they took Arnette. There were a lot of very talented cornerbacks that I had well ahead of him in my rankings list. I know many others did as well. So although it was a position of need, so you give him credit for that, it was a head scratcher because I did not see him going any higher than anywhere from the late second to early third. Then in round number 3, you go with pick number 80, wide receiver, running back hybrid, and Lynn Bowden out of Kentucky. And I can see potentially putting him at wide receiver because, again, that's a position need. Just getting Ruggs won't be enough. But I don't see why you took a guy who's kind of in between where he could play a little bit of both. I think you need to just take the best available at their respective position so that you can get that guy who can solidify his spot on the roster. Then in round number 3, at pick number 81, they took wide receiver Bryan Edwards out of South Carolina. There you have it. They take a natural wide receiver. I like this pick. He was very productive at South Carolina, and I think that he could fit in very well with them because that is a big position need. Besides Darren Waller, there weren't too many threats in that side of the ball for Derek Carr to throw to, and I believe that Derek can be successful if you give him the right tools. Then to cap off round number 3 at pick 100 for them, they went with linebacker Tanner Muse out of Clemson. He's a pretty versatile guy, but I do think that wasn't the right pick. They're a team that's taken a lot of interesting selections, a lot of guys from Alabama and Clemson. Those are two great schools to choose prospects from. They're very well coached with Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban. But this was a bit of a stretch for me. Taking him as early as 100 definitely shocked me. Then in round number 4, I picked 109. Then in round 4, at pick 109, they took guard John Simpson out of Clemson. It's a solid interior offensive lineman out of Clemson. I do actually like that pick, but I do think that it wasn't a big need because they already have such a good interior offensive line. I'd argue that's the biggest strength of the team, at least as of last season, based on the way they performed. That's always a very steady part of the team, so I think that wasn't a huge need. I feel like they could have addressed other positions, particularly in the secondary again, but fortunately for them, their next 4th round pick at 139, they did take cornerback Amik Robertson out of Louisiana Tech. This was a very good value pick, so they started and ended the draft very well in my opinion. It's just some of the picks in between were head scratchers. This is something that I think we've seen from Mayock and Gruden dating back to last year's draft. Some of those picks have panned out very well, but I do think as of right now, the right grade to give them is a rather low one, and that's why they fall on this list. Only time will tell as to whether or not I'll be incorrect, and those guys will pan out. Thanks again for watching, guys. Really do appreciate you guys taking the time out of your days to watch these videos, and make sure to let me know in the comments. What do you think about this video? What would you change? Was there a different team that you had in mind? Was there a couple of players that you think I was just completely wrong about based on team needs or the value of the pick itself? Make sure to let me know. I love having discussions amongst you guys, hearing your feedback, as it's definitely fun to interact with the people who check out the videos. But thanks again, and also make sure to follow on Instagram for more Beyond the Sport content at Beyond the Sport. Do a lot of bonus stuff on there, such as Instagram live sessions on Fridays every week at 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I've been doing a little bit of a new series where I've been creating graphics for my top 10 positional players among each position from the rookie class of this year's draft, so make sure to check that out as well. But thanks again, guys, and have a good one.